I am wearing a blue dial, integrated bracelet, stainless steel watch with an automatic movement, and it's Christopher Ward. Hi, this is Blake Bettner. Today we are talking about the Christopher Ward the 12. This was a surprising watch in a few ways from a brand that is known to surprise us quite often, most recently with their bel canto that brings a chiming mechanism to one of their original designs. Got a lot on the bel canto on Worn and Wound. We'll link the review down below. But this is a watch that's a bit different than that. This strays from the originality route a bit to wander into the well-trodden sports watch, sports integrated bracelet watch. And this is all well documented by Christopher Ward on their website. They are fully acknowledging of the space of some of the greats to come before this watch in the space. The whole section dedicated to Gerald Genta on their watch with, of course, the original Royal Oak that he designed in the early 70s, and then, of course, the Nautilus and the Ingenieur that came in the later 70s. Christopher Ward is clearly trying to position this watch in the vein of those greats. And of course, they're doing it at their own price point. This actually starts on a rubber strap just under $1,000, and on the bracelet here is priced at $1,225. This is the steel version. It also comes in a titanium version that adds a couple $100 to that price. All right, so why was this watch surprising? The integrated sport watch trend has, of course, been going strong for the past few years. So it's not too surprising to see a new integrated sports watches. A lot of brands have reached into their back catalogs for inspiration and built their own integrated sports watches. Of course, Christopher Ward doesn't really have anything like that, but the design that they've come up with here is slightly referential to a number of those modern integrated sports watch designs that we are so familiar with these days. And they are pretty upfront about that fact. Of course, you might see different watches specifically in it. I know I certainly do, and that's okay. You know, I don't think they're positioning this as like a wholly original Christopher Ward design. But it is original in a few ways, mostly where it gets its name from the 12, thanks to this dodecahedron bezel, which mates in with this integrated case quite nicely and adds a slightly different vibe from other watches that look a little bit like this, such as the JPEG Antarctique and the Ingenieur watches in that realm. This feels slightly into its own vein, but of course it's sitting adjacent to watches like that. And again, they're pretty upfront about that. So, you know, I don't really mind it here. The bracelet design is also very much their own. And again, this is at a Christopher Ward price point. So if you get into those integrated sport watch designs from brands like that, which are all, by the way, usually positioned up over $10,000, this is a highly attractive proposition from Christopher Ward here. And they've executed it really impressively, honestly. This is a lot of watch for around $1,000. Just getting a bracelet designed and manufactured like this at that price point is really something. Is anyone going to be mistaking this for a $10,000 watch? I don't think so. But that said, this has a great feel for it in the price range, and you know, I think there's a lot to enjoy here for $1,000. And it brings these design cues and this style of watch into a new realm of customers, which we are, of course, always in support for. So hats off to Christopher Ward for achieving something like this at this price point. Okay, so let's get down to the watch here. This is the Glacier Blue example. What makes this style interesting is the twin flag motif that is being used as the texture of the dial. From a glance, at a distance, it looks a bit like that barleycorn texture that we see from Chapek. They also happen to have a glacier blue dial in their Passage de Drake line. So this particular example maybe leans a little bit further into that realm than some of the others. But overall, it's very much its own thing once you start to notice some of the smaller details. Of course, the hands and the hour markers are a big part of that as well. The hour markers in particular, I find quite large for this dial. I wouldn't say it's out of balance, but it's certainly something that intrudes on the rest of the dial, maybe a bit more than I would prefer, but legibility is nice because of it, so no complaints from me there. This does have a date window at 6 o'clock, so it's a nice and symmetrical dial. The date disc is color matched to the dial. There is also a gray, a white, and a dark blue color option in the steel. Now, if you move over to the titanium version of the watch, you get a different blue and a purple. Each of those have a kind of a fume fade to darker territory on the edge of the dial, which is kind of nice and further sets the watch apart. Now, I mentioned that dial texture, which is nice when you look at it up close. Again, it might become slightly referential the further out that you're looking at it. My feeling is that this watch would work really well with a different texture, with maybe a stippled texture or a flat matte texture or something in that realm that would further set it into its own space. space. So let's talk dimensions here. This is a 40 millimeter case that measures a little over 44 millimeters from lug to lug, but that's not the full story with that. The edge of the case is the male version linking into the bracelet, and that doesn't articulate. So in practice, it's maybe a little bit more than that, but this isn't a large watch. It wears really beautifully on the wrist, and a big part of that is because of the thinness of the case. Christopher Ward lists this as 9.99 millimeters in thickness. By our digital calipers, it measures 10.21 millimeters, so not that far off, but a little over 10 millimeters by our calipers. Still though, quite thin, again, especially at this price point, and as a result, it kind of melts into the wrist the way you would hope a watch like this would, and that's usually the big draw with integrated watch bracelets, how well they wear. If you've ever worn something like a Royal Oak or a Nautilus, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They really just kind of melt into the wrist in kind of a silky way. This bracelet doesn't do that exactly. It's a little harsher, it's a little rougher around the edges than something like that. But again, when you consider the price delta, really shouldn't be surprising to you. This is still a very impressive bracelet for around $1,000, but there's still a few sharp edges here and there, and it might not wrap around your wrist in an entirely silky manner like some of those other watches. So the steel version of the 12 is using a Sellita SW200, where the titanium version, which is a millimeter thinner, according to Christopher Ward, is using a Sellita SW300. Really impressive stuff with this movement. This might be the thinnest case that I've seen with these movements, so kind of sets a standard for what you come to expect at this price point. In fact, I would say this entire watch kind of maybe shifts your standards, how you think of value in $1,000 watches. There's a lot to really enjoy here, a lot of original components that have been made by Christopher Ward in honor of the traditional classic integrated sports watch design. And again, they are very upfront about that, so I've got no real problem with it here. My preference would probably be in the titanium realm for this. I think that the fume dial helps to set it apart into its own realm just a little bit further. Additionally, the steel model here weighs 130 grams by our scale. Of course, we don't have a titanium one here to weigh, but I would imagine it's considerably lighter than that, considering just how svelte the watch is overall. The titanium one being all the more svelte than the steel version here. That is the Christopher Ward, the 12. I've got a lot more of my thoughts on this documented now over at wornandwound.com. We'll leave a link to that down below. Here's what you think about the 12. Is this too much in the same vein as some of those other integrated sports watches? Is this its own thing? We'd love to know what you think about this watch, so leave a comment down below. And again, hit up the review now live over on wornandwound.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to leave a like and share. Until next time, take care.